Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man? They say murder three. Strange things that happen here. No stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree.
Welcome to Strange Things, broadcasting from the Arkanasa Radio Studios in Laredo, Texas. And welcome to the show. I'm your host, Chris James. This is Saturday, November 25th, 2017. The year's just about over, and I've barely gotten used to saying it's 2017. Tonight, we're going to be talking about the Lizardman. But first, if you've had a bizarre sighting of some kind of cryptid, some unknown animal, please go to themajesticalcryptid.net. Audrey Cooper, a young woman I met in Jefferson at the Bigfoot conference, is looking to hear from anyone with sightings. If you just want to see what others have seen, have a look as well. It's a great site with lots of information. It's good to see people getting involved in the cryptid world. That's the majesticalcryptid.net. Well, we just came through another Thanksgiving celebration. If you're one of those folks who say they have nothing to be thankful for, let me pass on something my dad used to say. If all the problems in the world were hung on a tree, we'd all pick our own. People think they have troubles because they don't have the latest cell phone, or the job they're doing isn't paying $1,000 a day. I'm thankful for what I have. That's why, on Black Friday, I stayed home and enjoyed what I had instead of fighting all the other people trying to get more junk that I'd later have to keep an eye on so somebody didn't try to steal or break. Nope, no Black Friday for me. Lots of folks don't know what was going on back when the Pilgrims first arrived and had their Thanksgiving. So here are a few things to think about. To begin with, the Pilgrims all thought that the Indians were the lost tribe of Israel. Instead of trying to deceive them or steal their land, the Pilgrims wanted to convert them to whichever religion they held, or they wanted to know what the Indians knew. Most Pilgrims tried to make friends with the locals so the Indians would join them in their beliefs. Folks coming over from Europe had a weird idea on how things worked. They were only familiar with plants that grew in Europe, so things like corn and beans and squash weren't looked on as food. The Pilgrims had grown up eating lots of bread and pork, and drinking a lot of beer. When food began to run scarce, the settlers would send a note back to Europe asking for food to be shipped instead of hunting and gathering like the locals did. With winter coming on, the Europeans were not ready for a long, cold winter. The Indians, who were okay with these weirdos from afar deciding to share their food so that the white folks wouldn't all die and start smelling up the place. A Thanksgiving dinner was mostly squash, corn, fish, deer, and maybe a few wild birds. There was no pumpkin pie, no cranberries, no mashed potatoes. Ben Franklin was of the opinion that the turkey was a noble, majestic bird and should have been used as our country's symbol. He thought the eagle was a lazy scavenger that should be shot on sight. Thomas Jefferson wanted the eagle as the symbol of the United States. Rumor has it, Ben named the male bird Tom as a form of revenge. Just think, had Ben had his way, we would all have been sitting down to a cooked eagle instead of turkey. There would be eagle farms all across the nation growing big fat eagles for the holiday seasons. The world's record biggest turkey weighed 86 pounds. That's about as big as a 13-year-old kid. Only male turkeys make that gobble gobble sound. The females make more of a cackling noise. So when everybody's sitting around the dining room table making gobble gobble noises, you're only talking about the male birds, not the females. The guinea fowl was imported to England by Turkish merchants. The English just referred to them as turkey birds. When birds were imported from the colonies, the English thought the birds from the Americas were the same as the ones from Turkey. The English simply started calling them turkeys after a while. Then, after a few years, the English name was transported back to America. So, we can thank the English for naming the birds we now call turkeys. Mary Had a Little Lamb is in a way responsible for our celebrating Thanksgiving. Sarah Josepha Buell Hale wrote the nursery rhyme, Mary Had a Little Lamb, back in 1830. She also wrote several books, some poetry and others cultural. Sarah had decided the nation needed to recognize the celebration that the Pilgrims had first held back in 1621. For 30 years, going through 5 different presidents, Sarah continued to campaign for the nation to hold a Thanksgiving national holiday. During the Civil War, Abraham Lincoln thought we needed a national event that could maybe pull us all back together. When Sarah came to him with her request, Lincoln made a commanded decision, and he announced that Thanksgiving would become a national holiday, and it would be celebrated on the last Thursday of every November. So we can thank Sarah Buell Hale, Abraham Lincoln, the Civil War, and Mary Had a Little Lamb, all for giving us Thanksgiving. In 1953, a frozen food company discovered they had way too much leftover turkey from Thanksgiving. They were in a bind and they racked their brains for a quick solution. Somebody suggested slicing it into strips, placing it in a foil dish, adding some mashed potatoes and corn, freezing the whole thing, and then selling it as a pre-made dinner. The Swanson Frozen Food Company began distributing these ready-made dinners, and they called them TV dinners. You could sit in front of the tube and watch a show while enjoying, if your taste buds weren't too well developed, dinner. Thanks to the advances in food storage and folks being less than happy with the original TV dinners, you can now find some pre-made dinners that actually are pretty good. It saves having to make dinner if you're rushed for time. We're going to take a brief pause here and play a couple commercials. We'll be right back after this, so don't go away. You're listening to Arkanasa Radio. Do you have skin? Would you like to take better care of it? Call Lourdes James, independent beauty consultant, and set up an appointment. Call 723-3019. Coffee, nectar of the gods. And at the Organic Man Coffee Trike, you'll find coffee made the right way, one delicious cup at a time. Stop on by 4501 McPherson, sweet number 9. And remember, life is too short to drink bad coffee. If your vision isn't what it used to be, and you're not sure you're seeing Bigfoot or just your neighbor mowing his lawn, stop on by Del Norte Optical, 107 Calle del Norte, just across the street from the Embassy Suites. You should be able to see what you're looking at. Did you hear a bump in the night and you think it just might be a ghost? Contact the Laredo Paranormal Research Society at laredoparanormal@hotmail.com. That's the LPRS for all your otherworldly needs. You're listening to Strange Things with Chris James. And welcome back to the show. Some folks reported that the Loch Ness Monster was missing after last year's lack of substantial sightings. This led to some folks believing either Nessie had moved on or folks were no longer trying to propagate the legend. The naysayers were quick to jump in and say the lack of sightings was because the creature was never there in the first place. Well, things have taken a turn for the better. So far this year, people have reported a record 9 sightings. A 9-year-old boy, Sam Knight, was wandering along the shore of Loch Ness with the express intention of being able to photograph Nessie. He made the 8th sighting when he was taking pictures along the shore, and he caught an image on one of the photos. His mother, genetics expert Dr. Joe Knight, was looking at his pictures when she noticed a fin sticking up out of the water. After careful examination of the image, it was determined that he had managed to photograph Nessie. The sighting number 9 was made all the way from Michigan. No, they weren't using some special binoculars. There's a webcam that is permanently set up near Urquhart Castle that you can visit and watch for the monster while enjoying the trappings of your own home. Save on airfare as well. September 29th, 2017, Diane Turner had logged in and was watching the Loch Ness, the loch, when she spotted a wake out in the water. She watched as something big moved along just below the surface. The creature swam across the loch for about 2 minutes before submerging. Diane said she'd been watching the area where several recent sightings were reported earlier, when she spotted this strange wake moving in the water. Gary Campbell, the recorder and keeper of the official Loch Ness Monster Sighting Register, said that the wake did not come from any boat. After looking at the recording, he said this year was officially the sightings of the Loch Ness Monster in the past century. If you'd like to have your own sighting of Nessie, but don't want to sit on the cold, windy shores of Loch Ness, simply go to www.lochnes.co.uk/livecam and have a grand old time. You just might get to log the 10th sighting of the year. Now keep in mind, when it's 12 noon here in Texas, it's 6 p.m. over there. You won't see much if you log in after dinner because it'll be the middle of the night and they don't have any IR or thermal cameras on Loch Ness yet. Have you ever wondered why no one has ever been able to capture Nessie? Maybe this will give us an understanding. Back in April 2001, a Swedish monster hunter named Jan Sundberg traveled to Scotland with the intention of netting the Loch Ness Monster. He started out with a press conference where he told everyone his grand scheme. The high priest of the British White Witches, Kevin Carolan, was there to throw a wrench into the monster hunt. High Priest Carolan performed a magical spell that was to protect Nessie from being captured. It must have worked because Jan Sundberg was never able to catch the monster despite his best efforts. Gary Campbell, the president of the official Loch Ness Monster fan club, was there as well, giving his full support to the witch and helping keep Nessie in the wild. Hopefully, y'all will be happy to hear that the book, Strange Things, is coming along nicely. The original plan had been to write up all of the past shows and put them all together in one book. I'm now on Plan B. The first season, from April 30th until December 31st of 2016, came to well over 500 pages. Well, that was just the rough draft. I began editing them so they'd read better and make sense to y'all. I am now down to 470 pages, and there aren't that many photos. The book will be about everything I've talked about, from UFOs to John F. Kennedy. It will have some things included that didn't make the show due to time constraints. I hope to have the book out by the end of the year. I will keep you informed. In the Baltic Sea, right off the coast of Sweden and Finland, is an object that has raised more than a few eyebrows. Back in 2011, the treasure hunting and salvage company Ocean X spotted something on their sonar. The object was round and very symmetrical. The more they looked at it, the more it looked like something from a science fiction movie. Oops. My notes just went haywire on me here. The company was also perturbed by the flying saucer-looking thing, so they sent down an ROV to get a better look. As the ROV got closer to the object, their electronics began acting up. They pulled the sub back, and everything worked fine. Once more, they tried to get a closer look, only to encounter the same unknown interference. Something on the bottom of the sea was causing their equipment to malfunction. The disc is about 200 feet across, and it's perfectly round. There is an oblong rectangular cutout, making the thing look about as much like the Millennium Falcon from Star Wars as an object could look. Well, they sent divers down to the object, 300 feet below the surface, and they managed to recover a sample. It wasn't rock, but some unknown kind of metal. Naturally, the naysayers marched out and tried to say this was just remnant left over from glaciers that moved through the area back during the Ice Age. They also tried to suggest it was the gun turret that had fallen from a battleship during World War II, although there are no ships sunk anywhere near the object. The plan now is to try to bring this object up from the bottom of the sea. They don't know how heavy the object is or whether it can even be moved, but so far they have been looking into all possibilities to bring this odd disk up to the surface. You can check it out by searching Baltic Sea Anomaly. And now for the Lizardman, which all started back in 1988. Lee County, South Carolina, June 29th, 1988. Chris Davis had just gotten off of work. He'd been on the evening shift, and now he had to drive home in the dark. His route took him through the Scape Ore Swamp. The road was narrow and bumpy, not all that well maintained. As he drove along, Chris ran over something that caused him to have a blown tire. Well, there was no traffic, so he just stopped in the road and got out to see about replacing the flat tire. He got the jack and the spare, and then he got busy. The night was hot and humid, so he soon managed to work up a sweat. This is a lousy way to end the day. Once the spare was on and the flat was in the trunk, Chris took a second to look around before getting on back home. This was when he noticed how quiet it was. There are hundreds of creatures that call the swamp home, and they were usually very vocal. Something wasn't right. It took a second, and then the sound came to him from the road behind his car. It sounded like a rhythmic pounding, like something running along the dirt road. It was too dark to see, but whatever it was getting close. Chris felt uneasy, so he got back into his car. He slammed the door and stepped on the brake so he could shift into drive. As the brake lights lit up the road behind, he saw a thing coming at him from the dark. The first thing he noticed were the bright red eyes that seemed to glow on their own. The creature looked to be about 7 feet tall and covered with green scales, and it was now just behind his car. Chris hit the gas to get as far away from this weird thing as he could. As his tires spun in the loose gravel, the creature jumped up onto the trunk, and then it pulled itself onto the roof. Chris took off driving as if the devil were after him. Not very fast, since his car wasn't that good of a vehicle. He glanced back, but he didn't see anything. That's when he saw a set of claws grasping the molding around his windshield. Chris tried to go faster, and at some point the creature lost his grip and fell from the vehicle. Driving as fast as he could, Chris didn't slow down until he was in his driveway. He slammed on the brakes and ran inside. His sudden and noisy entrance awoke his parents, who rushed to see why their son was in such a panic. Chris told his story, and it must have sounded unbelievable. If not for the unexplained look of fear, his folks would have written the whole thing off as a joke or misidentification. For the next few weeks, Chris felt uneasy while driving, and as the sun went down, he had to look over his shoulder to be sure he wasn't being chased by the creature. July 16th, 1988, Chris's dad was reading the newspapers when he decided his son should go see the sheriff. There had been an article telling about how a car had been attacked and torn up by some unknown creature. The car belonged to Tom and Mary Way, who lived just outside of Bishopville, South Carolina. The car looked as if something huge had tried to eat it. There were claw marks and teeth marks all along the sides of their vehicle. Chris and his dad drove over to Lee County Sheriff's Office to file a report about his earlier encounter with what would soon be known as the Lizardman. Chris told the deputy what had happened, and if not for the report from the Ways, the deputy would probably have told the Davises to leave. Over the next few months, more reports came in of vehicles being attacked any time the cars were parked near the swamp. Each time the cars were covered with what looked like bite marks. The molding was pulled loose and paint was scratched. There were holes everywhere that looked like teeth marks. The sheriff's deputies found tracks that they were able to cast, but no one could say for sure what had made them. They didn't look like any known animal. The tracks had 3 toes, and they were about 14 inches long. In an effort to gain some recognition, the local radio station, WCOS, offered a $1 million reward for anybody who could capture or kill the oversized lizard. Now, Chris was the only witness so far, but The folks had heard about his encounter, and they all began referring to the creature as the Lizardman. The promise of a huge reward drew dozens of hunters to the Scape Ore Swamp, with visions of bagging this bizarre creature and becoming famous as well as wealthy. Now, having all these hunters, some of whom were of questionable ability or sobriety, the sheriff's department tried its best to keep the situation under control. The people were driving around the swamp looking for the Lizardmen. Others were splashing about trying to spot it or probably kill it. The citizens of Lee County were now having to watch for these overzealous hunters as well as the Lizardman. As far as we know, no one ever got shot at by one of these hunters. Maybe it just never got reported. Things were very exciting in and around the swamp for several months. As more sightings came in, the probability of hoaxes increased. There are always those who think it would be funny to run around and scare people. I don't think there could have been that many hoaxes because people were still running around with guns looking to earn that $1 million reward. But there are people out there who don't consider the ramifications of their stupid ideas. In Montana, in August 28, 2012, a man had decided it would be funny and exciting to dress up like Bigfoot and run around the side of the highway to get people to see him. He was either trying to increase the belief in Bigfoot being real, or he was making fun of those who do believe. He used a ghillie suit to create the Sasquatch-looking costume, and then he went to stand on the side of the road. As a car was coming, he stepped out onto the asphalt. Well, the car hit him, throwing the pretend Bigfoot to the ground. A second car managed to swerve enough to avoid further damage, but the third car ran over the hoaxer, killing him. A 33-year-old Randy Tenley was pronounced DRT, or dead right there. His friends came forward to tell authorities Randy was just trying to make people think he was a real live Sasquatch, so people would call in Bigfoot sightings. He thought it would be funny. So there are those who decide to be funny no matter how dangerous or unfunny they might be. The drivers of the two cars that hit him were not charged, but just think how it must have affected them to learn that they had hit and killed another human, if a foolhardy one at that. Now we're going to take another brief pause and play a couple of commercials, so don't go away. We'll be right back after this. You're listening to Arkanasa Radio. Are you taking care of your skin? Or are you going to wait and see how time treats you? Take care today by contacting Lourdes James, Independent Beauty Consultant, at 956-723-3019. Don't let time get the best of you. Coffee makes the world go round, and around here we have the Organic Man Coffee Trike, 4501 McPherson, Suite number 9. If you're not looking for coffee, try their tea. It's the best in town. And remember, life is too short to drink bad coffee. If you need to squint and hold things out at arm's length to see them, maybe you should get your eyes checked. Del Norte Optical, 107 Calle del Norte, is right across from the Embassy Suites. Now stop squinting and start seeing. This is Arkanasa Radio you've been listening to. And welcome back to the show. As time passed, people continued seeing the lizard man in and around Lee County, but most began choosing to keep it to themselves. The hunters mostly went back home intent on looking for some other way to get rich. The radio station pulled the reward, probably at the insistence of the sheriff. Things died down and got back to normal for a while. Recently, a woman attending church had stepped outside for a minute. As she stood there in the parking lot, she saw what she at first thought was a Bigfoot. It was tall and dark. She couldn't see too many details due to the shadows from the trees that in the distance. As the creature moved away through the trees, it passed through the shadows and into a lighter area. And that's when the woman was able to see it was the lizard man. She grabbed her cell phone and tried to click some photos. The photos were too small and just a bit blurry to get a really good image. She did say it looked like the creature that had 3 toes on each foot. The very next day, another person spotted the lizard man. It looked to be about 7 feet tall and had green skin that kind of looked like scales. The witness got his camera out and he managed to get a quick video of the lizard man as it moved away through the trees. He said he wasn't going to show the video, thinking that everybody would just make fun of him. Kind of like what happened to the P&G film. Once the story from the church was released, the man had a change of heart and he showed his video to others. The video shows what looks like a half man, half lizard walking through the woods. The whole video is only about 20 seconds long, but then the PG film was about a minute. When the total eclipse was coming, the emergency management folks in South Carolina began warning people that there just might be a resurgence of lizard man sightings, as well as other paranormal creatures. The thought was, with the sky growing dark during the day, the lizard man might think this was a good time to come out and hunt. That, or the strange effects the eclipse might have on unknown creatures. The emergency folks didn't want anybody to be unprepared for any bizarre activity. I couldn't find any reports from August 21st, but maybe the sightings went unreported. Today you can visit Bishopville, South Carolina. You'll see signs all over town advertising the lizard man. The folks decided to make the most of the situation by embracing the creature in a very loose way. They sell t-shirts, souvenirs, and you can get a lizard man burger at some of the restaurants. Bishopville is doing with Lizard Man what Roswell did with aliens. Now, this isn't the only place or time Lizard Man have been reported. Going back over 100 years, you can find people who have had run-ins with these green, scaly beings. Back in 1878, in Kentucky, a creature was captured in the woods that the locals had been calling the Wild Man. It was nearly 7 feet tall and covered with scales, more lizard than Bigfoot. The thing's eyes were twice the size of a normal man's. The people in the area had been seeing this creature lurking about in the woods, and it was beginning to worry some that this thing might just be a danger to them and their families. A group of men set out to either kill the beast or drive it away. Their plan went a bit awry, and they wound up capturing it instead. Once this green half-man, half-something else was in custody, the men who caught it decided to make the most of the situation by putting the creature on display, so they could charge people to come and have a look. The creature was being shown in Louisville, Kentucky, and people came from all around to have a look. There's no record of what eventually happened to the lizard man. Did it escape or die of old age? If it did die, what became of the body? Knowing a bit about people, they probably had it stuffed and continued displaying it until folks just lost interest. The remains might be sitting in somebody's basement right now, waiting to be found. 1934, an engineer named G. Warren Shuffelt said he had found out about an entire network of tunnels that ran beneath the city of Los Angeles. These tunnels were supposed to be filled with gold and other precious stones and metals. The tunnel system had been built by lizard people who had inhabited the area back before anybody lived in the area. Warren said he had gotten the story from a Hopi Indian elder who lived nearby. The story of the lizard people living underground and their affinity for gold and jewelry was passed on from one generation to the next for hundreds of years. The underground tunnels raised quite a stir, and they even showed up in the LA Times. Shuffelt said he had some maps and schematics showing where the tunnels were and how to go about getting into them. He had made these maps using something he called an X-ray camera that could penetrate the ground, kind of like ground-penetrating radar today. The main part of the tunnels were more like an elaborate underground city than just a bunch of passageways. The biggest part of this city was directly underneath downtown L.A. Shuffelt managed to convince several city councilmen that it'd be a good idea to try to dig down and connect with these underground structures. He probably told them they would get rich. I'll bet the idea of the folks living above these gold-filled tunnels received as much as a tiny percentage and never came up. A deal was struck and digging begun. Shuffelt supervised the tunnel going straight down that would hopefully connect up with some, if not all, of the treasure hidden below the streets. Work went on long enough to make it a 350 feet deep tunnel before the official permit was yanked. There was no reason given other than it was no longer allowed. Shuffelt left town in a huff. Later on, the city did allow oil field companies to come into L.A. and drill down looking for oil. There are still lots of old oil well sites all over the city, mostly abandoned in the claim for coming up dry. Did they really not hit oil, or were they actually looking for the tunnels full of gold? August 21st, 1955, near Evansville, Indiana, a woman was out swimming in the Ohio River when something grabbed her. She said it looked like a 7-foot-tall lizard, but it was built more like a man. The creature grabbed her by the leg and tried to pull her under. The woman's friend, not knowing what was trying to kill her, came to her aid, thinking her friend was just having trouble swimming. Together, the two managed to get free from the Lizardman and swim back to shore. Once they were safe and the story had been told, both women decided to not go swimming ever again. The one who was grabbed had to be treated in the hospital for injuries to her leg. They did file a police report, but nothing more came of the matter. In 1972, 2 Ohio policemen saw what became known as the Loveland Frogmen. March 3rd, Officer Williams had the first encounter while driving along Riverside Road just outside Loveland, Ohio. At first, the officer thought he was looking at a pair of dogs running around the side of the road near a bridge. When one of the two creatures stood up, the officer could see it was not a dog, but some kind of a half-man, half-frog or lizard. The eyes were bright red and glowed when the headlights hit them. It stood about 4 or 5 feet tall, and it was covered with scales. The head was unusually large for his body, and the eyes were set far apart. This led to the officer calling it a frogman instead of a lizardman. The two creatures disappeared under the bridge. The officer tried to get another look, but gave up since it was cold and rainy that night. When he got back to his station, he filed a report and sent it through channels. The investigating officer drove out to the scene and had a look for himself. He found marks along the ditch leading to the river, but he couldn't say what had caused the marks. March 17, 2 weeks later, Officer Johnson was patrolling outside of Loveland when he came upon what looked like a dead animal laying in the middle of the road. He stopped, intent on pulling the corpse out of the lane, when it jumped to its feet and ran for the side of the road. At the guardrail, the creature turned in Johnson's direction. Feeling threatened, the officer shot at the creature. It jumped over the guardrail and slipped into the water below. The officer was a bit shook up by the experience. He returned to the station and he filed his own report. It matched the report by Officer Williams, except the creature standing closer to 6 feet, and it looked more human than frog. 1975, near Milton, Kentucky, a man reported seeing a giant lizard roaming the woods around his junkyard. The initial report said the creature was 15 feet long and it looked like a snake, but others reported seeing the creature running on 2 legs. The last sighting was near the Ohio River. A group of mountain bikers route taking in the desert sights as they pedaled through the Sonoran Desert. They had stopped for a brief rest, and as they were relaxing, they spotted a strange-looking person walking along a trail. His movements looked odd because he appeared to have too many joints in his legs. Or maybe his legs weren't responding to his brain correctly. They watched him jerking along until one of the bikers made a slight sound. The man turned and spotted the 3 bikers. They were now able to see the man's eyes, and they saw he had slits instead of pupils, just like looking into a lizard's eyes. The skin on his face looked green with some yellow mixed in. As they watched, the man-lizard raised one claw-covered hand in some kind of a gesture, and then he turned and took off across the desert. He ran way too fast for any person. One of the cyclists described the lizard man as being about 6 feet tall and extremely skinny. It walked in a weird lurching manner, but it ran like a deer. Another cyclist said it had looked as if the creature had been examining them before it ran away. He also said the hand gesture was like nothing he'd ever seen before. Once the lizard man was out of sight, the trio spent a few more minutes watching to see if it would return. They finally got going once again, but found it difficult to make any headway since they kept slowing down and looking for the thing to return. Let's go back even farther, say 7,000 years. Al-Ubad is an archaeological site in Iraq. They've been finding all kinds of fantastic relics left over from thousands of years ago. They dug up a bunch of little statuettes that looked very bizarre. The body looks human, but the heads are all reptilian, lizards. These statuettes were dated back to 5900 BC. This was the pre-Sumerian time known as the Ubad period. The statuettes looked as if the artists were depicting lizardmen. The facial features are anything but human. The eyes are slanted and have reptilian pupils. The mouth sticks out more like a muzzle. The nose is nothing more than 2 small holes. Could ancient man have been witness to the lizardmen roaming about the planet and thought of them as gods? The science says there can be no lizardmen because our DNA won't mesh well with lizard DNA. I guess they're assuming at some time in the past a lizard and a human got together and created a new species. Just because it looks like it's half man, half lizard, doesn't mean there's any relation between humans and them. If you saw a bat and didn't know what it was, you might say it was half bird and half rat. Science will tell you that rats and birds can't mate. It looks like a bird, but bats are not related to birds. It looks like a flying rat, but there's no rat DNA involved. Lizardmen might just be a whole new species that has nothing to do with either men or lizards. Until some guy in a white lab coat sits down and gets to see a lizard man, the folks who are supposed to be looking into new and interesting things will say, they don't exist. There's another lizard-related group that may get confused with lizard men, the reptilians. Reptilians are a group of beings that come to the Earth sometime way back. They came from some distant star system long before our time. They were usually about 6 to 9 feet tall and seldom wore clothing. They didn't dress up unless they were in disguise. They're supposed to have some advanced technology that allowed them to turn invisible. The lizard men are more of an animal, and their means of thinking is probably, can I eat that, or will it try to eat me? The attacks on cars were probably in an effort to consume the vehicles. The reptilians are an advanced space race with high enough intelligence to be able to travel through space and build technological equipment designed to deceive us. They might still want to eat us, but they'd use some kind of trickery to lure us into the kitchen. May 2011, a man was exploring a cave in Austria. It had been recently discovered by a friend of his. He worked his way in through a narrow opening, and then he had to crawl for quite a ways. As he was making his way into the cave, he thought he could hear voices up ahead. This didn't cause him any concern, since there could be other cave explorers coming in from a different route. The cave explorer soon found himself in a larger section of cave where he could stand. As he was moving forward, he spotted some lights moving up ahead. He waited to see who was coming his way. As the lights grew brighter, he found himself looking at a group of lizard men. They stood upright, like men, but they definitely were not human. They were very muscular and extremely frightening looking. The creatures were all wearing some kind of clothing that resembled uniforms. The sounds he had heard, thinking were voices, turned out to be these creatures communicating. It sounded like speech, but it was no language he had ever heard. As more of these creatures came into the large room-like cave, the witness decided it was time to get out of there. He managed to crawl backwards into the smaller cave tunnel he had used to get in. He moved very slowly, so he wouldn't make any noise, afraid these lizard men would attack him. He thought that just maybe they might know which cave he'd come in through and be out there waiting for him when he emerged. Once he was out, he nearly ran all the way back to his friend's house to tell him what he had just seen. His friend, of course, thought he was lying or crazy. Then there are the shape-shifting reptoids that have the same history but have the ability to change their bodies to look like humans or make us see them as humans anytime we look at them. Every politician and world leader has been accused of being a reptilian or a reptoid. The internet is filled with poorly made Photoshop images of people with lizard eyes in an attempt to prove they're aliens trying to control our planet. Now, I'm not saying that this isn't possible. I'm just saying the folks trying to prove one politician is a reptilian so that their politician can win should try using real facts instead of manufacturing them. These folks are so intent on supporting their chosen political party, they never bother to look into who's actually behind that particular group. I went over this in the show Puppet Masters back in October the 20th, 2016. If the reptilians had the technology to morph their images into human shape, I think we'd never be able to see through their disguise. The naysayers will tell you they can't get here from there, so there are no aliens visiting Earth. I guess they all think that the aliens are flying to visit the Earth and then zooming back home to Alpha Centauri every night. The idea that these aliens might have started their voyage way back thousands of years ago never crossed the skeptics' minds. Now try this out for size. Thousands of years ago, an alien civilization decided to boldly go where no reptilian had gone before. It was going to be a one-way trip, but then they had all burned their bridges already, and they had no reason to ever go back. If you've been following our space program, you'll have heard about our mission to Mars. A bunch of volunteers are willing to take this one-way trip to the Red Planet. They will never come back. If humans are willing to do it, then why not aliens? So thousands of years ago, a giant spaceship came slipping into our solar system. It found some nice dark spot to park in, say the dark side of the moon, or maybe the moon itself. After all, the moon is said to be thousands of years older than the Earth. Go back and listen to my show, The Moon, June 4th, 2016. I go into a lot more detail about it. The aliens looked at our planet and they decided, hey, let's check it out. Now, they wouldn't take their giant mothership to come down and look. They'd send down smaller ships, just like the jets that fly off the deck of an aircraft carrier. The people want to assign these aliens the same thought process as our own. Back in 1947, when the alien disk crashed near Roswell, people said, well, why didn't the aliens come and recover the ship? Well, why should they? Maybe the craft wasn't that important, and if there were gray aliens in it, they may have been simply created to use for these weird missions, kind of like clones. In Shag Harbor, a second spacecraft did come to the rescue of the first disk that had crashed into the water. It may have had some important information or samples the aliens wanted. Maybe the ship was secondary to the stuff on board. I hear people say why this alien craft can fly millions of miles across the galaxy only to crash in the desert. Like I said, the craft we see flying about are not the same as the ones used across the galaxy. You never hear about aircraft carriers running into each other. Next time somebody says they can't get here from there, just tell them what I just said. Now, don't forget to swing by the majesticalcryptid.net and have a good read. I hope you enjoyed the show. If you did, tell your friends. If you have some strange thing you'd like to share or hear more about, you can contact us at strangethings@arkanasa.com or our Facebook page, Strange Things with Chris James. Back in 1776, someone said, "Give me coffee or give me death." And if that's how you feel, you should be at the Organic Man Coffee Truck. They make coffee the right way, one delicious cup at a time. 4501 McPherson, Suite number 9. Coffee, the stuff dreams are made of. Did you go out UFO hunting and couldn't focus on the sky? Swing on by Del Norte Optical, 107 Calle Del Norte, right across from the Embassy Suites. That's not a weather balloon, that's a flying saucer. This is Arkanasa Radio you've been listening to.
Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man, the same murder three? Strange things that happen here, no stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree?